So today we're doing another Vinland Saga chat. I have my friend Philip Chase returning again as my guest, where we are continuing our discussion of Vinland Saga. We are finishing up the second arc today, talking about book 7. Philip, did you love it?
Oh, I did. I really did.
Yay!
I loved it.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. I mean, I've been consistently impressed with Yukimura's incorporation of themes in here and how effectively he gets them across with the dialogue and with the images. Just visually, he gets a lot of rich thematic work across with the visuals too. So I'm a fan. I'm an absolute fan at this point.
Yeah, I agree. He does such a great job of building up characters and plot that serve the themes, and you can tell, we talked about this a little bit before with Gardar, you can tell he's a character constructed to reinforce what he's trying to discuss, but he does it in such a way that it still feels so natural and seamless for the story itself, and I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the characters, Gardar being a very fine example of a character who does forward several important themes. Masculinity and slavery and violence and vengeance and so many of them that are being explored very richly. But he's also a very just compelling character. He's a fascinating individual who's very tragic, of course, but that's a very good example.
Yeah. So did you, now that you've finished the arc, did you like this one more or less than the first?
Oh, wow. That's a tough comparison to make.
It is, isn't it?
I think that the second arc is exploring stuff that Yukimura really wanted to delve into. I suspect if we were to sit down and talk with him, I have no idea what he would actually say, but I suspect that he might say that he got to some very important things in this arc. Things that he wanted to talk about. I mentioned already suffering and all of that, and slavery being a very important form of that in this, but also violence and pain and vengeance and masculinity and fatherhood and courage, right? And he does, what I really love about it is he doesn't just present one form of courage. He explores several different kinds of courage. Like in our last discussion, we mentioned how Arnheid was the most courageous character in the whole arc in some ways. You know, that's not the physical courage that we typically associate with the word, but nevertheless. And the other side of that being cowardice, which is also explored in here, and the idea of escaping and creating a better world, and also friendship is just huge. Friendship.
Oh, it's so big. Yeah.
It's a big one. It's sort of, I think, the one that holds this arc together, perhaps, is friendship.
Yeah, it is. As well as breaking through chains, new life sprouting up within yourself. Becoming a new man, both in Thorfinn and Olmar, we get to see it.
Yay.
and like you said, the people around us that help us shape ourselves and become a new type of person. Yeah, it is heavy with a whole lot of great conversations, as well as he continues to further the impact of how fruitless violence and war truly is. And showing that from the perspective of Canute's people, and it was really good. It was really good. We can get into the details of it, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think the first arc is widely loved. A lot of people just think that it's phenomenal. The second arc, I think, a lot of people didn't like because of the drastic slowdown in pacing, but it's still very, very widely loved. And I liked arc 2 even more than arc 1.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, I did. Farmland was just a little bit higher for me, but they're both, absolutely impeccable from my perspective.
It really does build on the first arc too, of course.
It does.
And we don't get a ton of Askeladd, but we still get a little bit of Askeladd even,
yeah,
right?
We get a little bit of him. Yeah. Thorfinn really became the main character in this arc, and I think he earned it too.
But with echoes of what was established in the first arc, for sure.
Yeah.
And as you said, we start with Canute here in the very beginning, and the very look on his face is one of a man who is determined to get what he's trying to achieve by any means.
Yes.
And that brings in a bunch of these themes that we were just talking about, masculinity and fatherhood and courage and dreaming and visions and all of that. The idea of a better world, and we have a very big contrast in here, don't we, between his idea, Knut's idea, and the idea that is evolving within our character Thorfinn about how to achieve this better world.
Yeah, he's a man of resolve. He's a man who's decided what's right and what's best for the greater good, and he's willing to do what it takes to get there. And he's followed by a lot of very strong men that will help him accomplish that.
Yep. And speaking of strong men, you get another exploration of all of that, I think, in the character Thorgils and his arrival. Their arrival is very much deliberately juxtaposed to Knut's sea voyage, and here they are arriving back in their farm in Denmark, and exactly the panel.
Poor dad.
Poor Kettle, who is completely unmanned here and being exposed for the coward that he is, which is a shame to even apply that word to a man whose instincts are actually, I think, generous and benevolent, but because of that masculine ideal that he's supposed to fit, he does some truly awful things.
Horrendous.
In this book.
Well, and his pride too.
Yeah.
His pride is deeply harmed in this sequence, and I think we get to see. I think maybe I'm just not being very generous, but I think that a true man would hold true to what he believes, and he, at the first sign of opposition, the man that he wants to be, this image that he wants to project of being like this good, kind, generous farmhand, completely crumbles. And he regresses in such an extreme way. And I think it kind of shows how faulty the Kettle that we first saw really was, how faulty that image was.
Yep. You're absolutely right about a true man, and sometimes it's referred to in here as a true warrior, which goes all the way back to Thor's.
It does.
But the contrast there is, I think, two characters, and you already mentioned, well, of course, Thorfinn is the one who's trying to articulate, trying to find within himself this better way of being in the world than this more toxic way that everyone is following. But also, you mentioned Omar, who he finds his own courage, doesn't he? In the corner. We'll have to get to that part, but that was a really nice part. Yeah.
Oh man, who would have guessed that this little punk ended up being such a great character?
And having his own kind of courage, I love that. But also Thorfinn's exploration in here on pages 24, 25 of how he broke his vow not to use violence, and he's really trying to figure this out. And Einar is telling him there are times when you have to fight in order to bring about what's right and what's good. And there's a lot of, it's a very difficult line to draw exactly, right? Are you going to be a complete pacifist? Or is there a time when it's actually right to use violence, to stop violence?
Yeah, and I think for a big focus on this story is, of course, in Thor's ideology of a true warrior, and Thorkel not sure what it is, and that idea that he never got to pursue haunting him, and him still looking for it. And now we have Thorfinn, who is giving his entire self to try to figure out what that meant, and to try to fully embrace the ideals that his father tried to give to him, but he didn't attempt to pick up. And so now, without his father there with him, he's trying out different hats almost, This much violence is okay. No, it's not. No violence. No, this much. And really trying to figure out the true meaning of a true warrior, and figuring out how to live with the ideals that Thor's already embodied. And Thorfinn lost him at such a young age. He didn't care about these ideals when he was a boy, and then completely rejected them whenever he pursued vengeance. So I really appreciate the back and forth That was something that I was missing with Canute whenever he had his big transformation, is I really wanted a lot more back and forth from him. Sorry. Whenever he surrendered his faith and surrendered his ideal of his loving father and surrendered his meekness and all these things, there's subtle back and forth from him, but I really wanted more turmoil, and we certainly get that turmoil from him now with the visions he's having. But I really appreciate getting it from Thorfinn here, where he is, one step forward, two steps back, like really trying to figure out where he's supposed to stand.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, we certainly, with the head, the fathers with Sweyn's head, that certainly is a manifestation of Canute's guilt, his turmoil, his whole wrestling with what it means to be a ruler and how to establish this vision of his.
And wrestling.
And so he... Go ahead. Oh, no, not... actually, I was going to transition to something else, so it would be better if you go ahead, I think.
Okay. Just in wrestling with the idea that he didn't want to let the crown rule him, and he is. And so wrestling with that declaration he made, but at the end of the day, he's falling into it in different ways. Yeah,
beautifully said, yeah. So I was thinking about this poor kettle fellow, and I think what he does in here is maybe the most hideous act of all, but
it was rough.
What's set up here on this page, these 2 pages here, I think is just so effective. You have him learning about Arnheid's quote-unquote betrayal and all of that, which
you called that his wife was bitter and jealous.
Oh yeah.
I didn't really call that. I just assumed, the farmhand, the leader, he has a mistress, which not a mistress. She did not have a choice. But anyway, so this is just the way it is. But you called that she was actually bitter about it, and I didn't see that before it came out.
Yes. Yeah, she's feeling rejected, put aside, all of that. And the man you see here, she's deliberately goading him. And he snaps. He's such a combination of self-loathing and cowardice, and he has some good instincts. He tries to be generous with Thorfinn and Einar. He seems like when you first meet him, wow, even Einar remarks on it, like, oh, he's a nice guy. Maybe this isn't so bad, right? But here he snaps, and because a lot of things have happened to him, he's learned that Canute is after his land, and his whole identity is being threatened, right?
Terrible things have happened to him, and he's just lost control. He doesn't have control over his situation anymore. He doesn't have control over his farm, over protecting his people, over his own future and safety. He's lost control, and it's not his fault. And he's spiraling to the point that now he comes home, and one of the few things that he was successfully controlling and thought would still be there for him to control, Arnheid, his favored slave, he's now told that she's abandoned him too. So he just loses it. He just completely loses it.
Exactly. And as you were saying, a real man has control, right? That's the attitude, and that a real man is always in control. And so he asserts his control in the one way that is left to him, which is by beating Arnheid to death, essentially. I mean, she doesn't die right away, but he basically beats her horrifically. And this is how he's reclaiming his masculinity, I suppose, how he's asserting some control in his life. And it's disgusting. It's absolutely horrible.
It is.
It's a good illustration, though, of how that works in the world.
Mm-hmm. Speaking to the art style real quick, that desperation that he feels, this panel right here, I think it's what we've already said so many times, is how well he draws the eyes and emotion and captures exactly what a person is feeling through their eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, and there is an interesting, during this horrible episode of Arnheid being beaten, which I don't want to dwell on too much, but it's because it's just so horrific.
It really is. It really is.
But there is a thing that happens, and he is, of course, not understanding that he's killing his own child within her as well.
He refuses to believe her. He thinks that she's lying to try to save herself.
Yeah, he's really lost it. He's lost all.
He really has.
Of reality, and he's completely driven by fear at this point. The one, redeeming moment in here is when Snake actually intervenes, and he does so by allowing not to take face away from this guy who's completely, he's trying in the one horrible way he can to save face, to assert control, and Snake understands all of that. So he presents it in such a way as, well, no, he doesn't say, you have to stop this, you're killing her. She is your slave, and you can do as you wish, but you will be out of some property here. And so he does that in a very smart way, but he's acting out of a place of compassion, even though that's how he frames it. You can see it in his face and everything else. He's acting from a place of compassion.
I absolutely agree with you. I think he did very much like what you may remember his name better than I do, the farmhand who was once a slave and earned his freedom. Do you remember his name?
Oh, yes, Pater. Yeah.
Pater. It's what Pater was doing with the children, where he's wording it in a way so that it's appealing to him as a master, as a leader, but he's giving him a way out. And that's essentially what Snake is doing, just less of giving him a way out and more of convincing him out of it. But he's presenting it, if he tried to assert himself, if he tried to be the dominant figure here, I'm not sure Kettle would have snapped out of it. But he's presenting it in a way that shows he truly understands Kettle and understands the situation. But his life was just saved by this woman. So I absolutely think that this was not him appealing as a servant, but him appealing as a friend to Arnheid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, and this violence precedes the larger scale violence of the battle that is imminent, and in the same way, you see Kettle trying to whip up the locals, those people who are dependent on him. Those basically he's paying off. He's allowing them to erase their debts and all of that. And as he's whipping up the crowd. The mantra, which again gets repeated, is "might makes right." Might makes right, right? Yeah. Which is again this idea of this masculine ideal of strength and a kind of courage, if we want to put it that way, and a kind of violence. So you impose violence on the world to enforce your will. That's the model
and it
here.
reinforces the other phrase that he continues, or ideal that he continues to come back to throughout the series, which is the winners of war write history, which is true, and and that's essentially what those two ideals are saying is when we win, we write the history, we pick what was true here, which I think is an ideal that a lot of people do follow.
It does make one a little bit skeptical about history too, doesn't it? About the received truths that we have.
Sure.
I think it's often when you finally do understand another perspective, you begin to see a different narrative. So. Yeah,
which you know more about history than I do, but there's this ideal that history changes every 5 years. Because you discover more and then it recontextualizes. So, the nobles and the kings and the leaders were the only history we had for a long time because they were the most literate. And then you come to find, you peel back more and more and you see the other sides and you realize, oh, that was not the full truth.
So true. You often have historians in one generation praising a certain figure, and in the next saying, no, actually, he was a bad king.
Right.
Because he did this and this, and so it's a complex picture that emerges.
Yeah.
But I love the contrast we get here with, again, Thorfinn, and the beautiful moment in this particular book is the reunion of Thorfinn and Leif Erikson. And this is on page 70, where it happens a little prior to this, but I love this panel where you've become a man. You've become what his father would have thought of as a true warrior. And this is a beautiful moment because this is prior to that, they're having this whole conversation about Thorfinn is trying to articulate these ideals that are forming in his mind. And he is saying we have to do the right thing here. We can't just flee. We have to try to resolve the situation as peacefully as possible.
Right.
And you see it in Leif's expression here. He gets it. You've become a man, a man with a certain kind of courage. It might not be what you thought was courage before, but it is a real kind of courage.
And what a lovely confirmation from the man who knew his father so well, who traveled with him and lived with him and fought beside him, to then just be able to look at Thorfinn and say, you're so like your dad. It's really beautiful.
It is a beautiful moment in here. One of many.
I also love... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the beautiful friendships that are in here, the primary one I think of when I think of it is Thorfinn and Einar, but Thorfinn and Leif, beautiful, right?
Yeah.
It's such a nice friendship.
He is. And I think, too, Leif is such a great representation of the father figures that we've discussed in previous videos. Not just to Thorfinn as someone who was looking to adopt him and take him on and bring him in as his son after his father died, but also as someone who was looking for Thorfinn and taking in boys that had that description, that met the criteria, but what they weren't him. But then he keeps them, like Bug Eyes, who it's like, okay, you're not who I was looking for, but you are one person that I can father. You are one person that I can help. And I think that's so beautiful.
It is beautiful. A slightly different version of that is the relationship between Kettle and Snake, which Snake reveals why he's loyal to Kettle. And Kettle,
what about that reveal?
He calls him like an older brother or a father figure in a sense, who takes him in when he was down and out. So Kettle is not just pure evil here. He's a man who's in some ways a victim of what he thinks a man ought to be, which is extremely tragic. But that does not excuse in any way the horrible act of violence that he perpetrates. But you get Snake's perspective here, and Snake's absolute loyalty, which is again a part of the whole warrior ideal, is loyalty is a big deal.
Yeah. So
he explains why he's sticking with this guy, and in turn, his followers decide to stick with him here, right?
Even though he tells them, you have no reason to follow this guy. You've no loyalty to him. Go, save yourself. And they were like, no, we're not leaving you. We don't care about Kettle, but we're not leaving you. Yeah. It's amazing. Which, I mean, the reveal that Kettle was never Kettle, Never
Iron Fist or whatever that nickname was. Yeah.
Everything we believed about him was a lie, which I suspected, and so did you. I remember you saying this, that the stories were embellished. But the fact that he was just a man who came to a farm and the farmer was dead, so he's like, guess it's me now. Like, oh my goodness, that was such a surprise, but it also worked so much because it kind of, it explains why this facade that he built up crumbled so quickly.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. So you have these competing ideals even within the character. And I think that's really well done. You get a complexity of character there. You get conflict within a lot of these characters. And often you have it Yukimura depicting these contrasts right on the page. For example, on pages 111 and 112, you have Arnheid's vision of Gardar and in better times, where she wants to return to her family. She wants to, metaphorically speaking, go home. In other words, she's ready to die. But there's a beautiful vision associated with that, and that is immediately juxtaposed and contrasted with the battle that is going on nearby. So you have what's going on with this scene with Arnheid and what's going on within her, and then you have this horrific battle, which is just gore everywhere. It's really graphically depicted, and you have these very professional mercenaries who are just merciless, and they are actually enjoying this. Because they are just tearing through these locals, these farmers.
The thrill of the fight. and the
Yeah,
honor that
I mean-
comes with being a warrior, and then
Yes,
the same with
yes.
Thorkel too, in the water.
Oh, he's the most like he's
Oh,
the
yeah.
worst version of it.
Yeah, he's horrifying.
Because
And it's so funny that
and this is a
sorry.
go ahead.
It's so funny that we have characters like Thorkel, not Thorgil, Thorkel, who is the same. He's that too. The thrill of war,
is.
the violence, the death, the murder, the excitement of it all. But like he's charming to us. But like he is. I mean, there's more to him. He has a lot of humanity to him. He has a lot of kindness, and he gives. He doesn't just take like Thorgil just takes. But it is interesting how well he wrote Thorkel, that he's still likable despite being the embodiment of that.
Well, you that's a very wise comparison actually, because they do both embody these ideals of courage, physical courage, the prowess of a warrior, but Thorkel also embodies the positive aspects of the heroic ideal, which is loyalty,
Right.
Honor, that sort of thing. Whereas Thorgil, he's a sneak, and he's really just all about killing as much as he can. He doesn't care about anything else. So he's really different in that respect. So they are. It's a great to compare the two of them. They both do embrace a certain kind of violence, but Thorkel does so in a way that I think he, in his mind, is honorable.
Right.
Whereas Thorgil doesn't care so much about honor as just pure violence.
Yeah,
And so he is willing to do some really shady things.
Yeah. Well, yes. And Thorkel will surrender a fight if he acknowledges that he truly lost it. And if his opponent doesn't have a weapon, he'll give a weapon. Like you said, he has that honor to him. He also, on the surface, Thorgil is loyal to his own, which Thorkel is too. He doesn't care about other people unless he deems them one of his own, and then he cares about them. And so that looks the same, but the truth about Thorgil is that he's really not that loyal to his own. Like Olmar, he said, either fight or die. Don't surrender. That's not a choice. So even his own, he's like, no, you don't get a choice in this, or you're gonna die if you try to surrender.
That's right. Or even the way he treats his father. It's pretty awful.
Yes.
And it's a fact that you have a lot of old stories, myths, and legends about the dangers of warriors, because in these times, the society depends on warriors to protect them, right? But there's a flip side of that. When these warriors get out of control, which happens in battle, that's a thing. When the bloodlust is too much, they become dangerous to everyone, to everyone around them. Thorkel never slips into that, whereas Thorgil is clearly, he could turn on anyone, you know. So, and you see it, the contrast between Thorgil here, who's like a shark in the water, he's sneaking up behind Canute, and then there's poor Olmar, who couldn't do it, and he's ashamed, but it's a shame that he's ashamed because he has better instincts than his brother in many respects. I mean, yes, some people would call him a coward, but other people would call him actually more in tune with his humanity than his brother, who is kind of a monster. I mean, look at this guy coming out of the water here. He's one scary dude.
Olmar is more in tune with other people's humanity too, which is a huge theme in this arc, is the value of others' lives, in Thorfinn's realization of how many people he's harmed. And here Olmar is seeing the slaughter. He saw it earlier when his brother was doing it, and now on this larger scale, and he sees the value in the lives that are being taken, and he's horrified at what he's witnessing, which I think is a sign of someone who is going in the right direction, you know, which I really appreciate that perspective of someone who wanted to embrace the thrill of war and wanted that Viking lifestyle. And then when he's confronted with it, he realizes how horrifying it is. It's not glorious. It's terrifying. And then also we get to see the might makes right from the other side of the
There
battleground.
it is.
Yeah.
There
Which
it
is
is.
great because it shows that both opposing sides have the same ideology, which is whoever comes out on top, that's the correct one. Everything else doesn't matter.
Doesn't feel so right though when you're on the bottom, does it?
No, it doesn't.
And you see that in poor Kettle's eyes there, even beneath his helm. You can see that, and it takes this farmhand, some laborer. I don't think he's a slave, but he's probably dependent on Kettle in some way, and he's been more or less coerced into this. Basically revealing it to him. Okay, you're not the biggest fish in the pond here, so might makes right. How's that feel, right?
Right, absolutely. Also, Yukimura really likes horrifying imagery with eyeballs. It's like a theme.
Yes.
He loves poking out people's eyes or slicing through them or gouging them out. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrifying. But it's effective.
Yeah, it is.
Because it somehow it does a lot more to me than slicing through a body.
Yeah, same here. And that's of course you're referring to the duel. First, of course, Thorgil attacks Canute, who does a fairly admirable job of defending himself, but is gonna be
he's in
trouble
overpowered.
until Wolf comes along, and then there's that whole the eyeball thing where these guys are just animals going at each other.
I know.
They're animals.
Yeah.
And they're tearing and ripping and clawing at each other however they can. Yeah.
Then we cut back to the scene with Arnheid and Leif and them, and I loved the scene where Leif is trying to offer her. He's like, "Come back with us. Come back to this place that we've built up. That's far more peaceful. There's not war there." Yeah. And she asks, "Is there slavery? Are there slaves?" And he says, "You see, he's so hopeful, and then his face just drops, and he's like, well, yeah, there are." I guess he didn't say there's no war. He just said you'll have better hope there. And then she asks, "Is there war?"
Yeah.
And he says, "There was fighting, and there will probably be fighting again. It's part of human nature." And she chooses to just kind of walk into the next destination for her. She chooses to walk into the vision because she doesn't want to continue living this way. She doesn't want to continue living on this earth that is so riddled with so much pain and slavery and fighting, and it's a great parallel to what's happening literally, a couple hundred feet beyond. All that is happening right there, and she's acknowledging it as it's happening and saying, "No, I don't want to live on in a life like this," which really reinforces in Thorfinn what his vision is: creating a land where there is no war, no slavery, creating a land that is truly of peace. Yes.
Yeah, she is a catalyst for both Thorfinn and Einar in their resolve to somehow establish this world. And it is just so... I love how Yukimura presents this, because you're right, she's hearing the conflict, the battle off in the distance, but what she's seeing is when her own home was ransacked and raided and she was enslaved. And for her, it's just too much. There's too much pain in this world, and she needs to leave. She needs to leave. And there's that blurry vision of Gardar and their son, and now, of course, the infant that will be joining them as a family.
Yeah.
And poor Einar in this scene. I mean, he loves her, and he confesses his love, this poor guy, to try to
hoping
save
that
her.
that'll make her stay.
Yeah.
Hoping that, the chance of, well, there's a future with me, though. There's a life ahead with me. But she's already made her choice. And then we see Thorfinn trying to do exactly what his father did for the slave that was dying in front of him. It's a really heavy scene.
Look at this wonderful thing he does here too. With there she is, within her vision of a happier life after this one. But also, the title of the chapter is "Birth of a Warrior," and it happens through her death. So you have a death and a birth here simultaneously, and of course, it's the birth of Thorfinn as the warrior that his father wanted him to be. The person who fights for peace and justice and goodness in the world. So this is beautifully done, I think, here in such a way that you have a death and a life here simultaneously, very much juxtaposed.
Yes, and along with that, right before that chapter change, or right after, I'm not sure, a near continuation of that cycle, which is something that he constantly references back to, and that's in Einar, when he is ready to go after Kettle and his family and anyone he can.
Exactly.
Snake comes back and he's like, "Why are you still here? Go, run!" Yeah, he saw Kettle. He saw Kettle on Snake's back, and just Einar just lost it. He basically did what Kettle did. He completely lost it and went into unadulterated violence. And he had someone standing behind him pulling him out of it. A little bit more aggressively this time.
Yeah.
Thorfinn just steps in and hits him to knock him out of it. But yeah, he was about to repeat that cycle, which is something that Yukimura keeps hearkening back to.
Which is so interesting because there's an example of Thorfinn using violence to prevent violence, to help his friend in this situation.
Right.
Which is really very poignant. And he's, of course, Einar hit him first, but Thorfinn is not reacting out of anger or violence. He's reacting because he thinks this is the only way I can stop my friend from doing something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He will suffer the way I have suffered. Exactly. Because I acted all those years on vengeance. Vengeance was what drove me. It was the reason I was alive. And look what it did to me. I don't want this to happen to my friend.
Exactly. He was saving his friend from going down that same path that he's just now being able to start pulling himself out of. His line, "It will only lead to more anger and more death. That's how our world descends into hell. I've seen it for myself. Please, brother, don't fall under the same curse that struck me." It's so powerful how far he's come and how much he truly has changed.
Absolutely. And look where it ends up with the two of them with their hands clasped at Arnheid's grave. With this, there's a promise here. There's the sunlight coming through the clouds very deliberately. There's the clouds, the suffering and the pain, but there's light coming through now. There's this vision of a promise of a place where maybe we can have less of this pain and suffering, or maybe a world where there aren't slaves. And that sort of thing. And they do it, and I love this because, again, she is the catalyst in so many ways for Arnheid. And ending on this very potent symbol here of her grave with their hands clasped in front of it.
It's beautiful. And I appreciate, Arnheid really is the star of this arc.
She is.
So much has come from what she did physically, like protecting Snake from dying and her sacrifices on her own, but then also how much she was the catalyst for what's to come. And I really appreciate that honoring of her there at the end.
I also like that Yukimura gives Arnheid agency of her own. That she, as you pointed out, she acts to save Snake in the moment when Gardar was going to kill him. She decides to save Gardar. She's given agency. So this isn't just two men being spurred by the loss of a woman to do some great thing. She has her own agency, makes her, and I think she is the most courageous character in this entire arc.
I do too.
Yeah,
I do too. And even though her death and her suffering does aid the plot of these men very well, and even though there's a lot of things that you could kind of point to and say, like, on paper, maybe this wasn't perfect, but there's also a lot of things for her individually that she got her own agency in her own arc, like choosing to protect her child and choosing to have a life that is realizing that she lost so much of her freedom and she lost her child because of war, and so choosing to give her child safety this time and not to continue to enter into it, and choosing not to continue in a world that's full of war, and her own individual arc, but also her own individual strength, and her choices that were made throughout this arc. I think she as a character is so important on her own and not just what happened to her.
Exactly. I agree 100%. And their choices, unfortunately, lead to a place where she's in her grave at the end. But what courage and what beauty she brought into the world in the meantime. Whereas you see a character like Canute, and look what he's bringing into the world with his choices, which he justifies continually, and he has this whole dialogue with his father's head about his earthly paradise and all of this. But the only way to get there in Canute's mind is to kill his way there, over this path of corpses. Mm-hmm. And then again, contrast that, not this time with Thorfinn, but with this guy, right? With Olmar, who is horrified when he returns to the guest lodging at his father's farm and sees people maimed and screaming in agony and guts and blood and all of that. And he realizes that everything that his brother had been trying to push him into was a lie. Mm-hmm. It was a lie. And he realizes that that's not who he is. And the best moment of all is when he's in there and he's being asked to make this decision, because the old master, his grandfather, realizes something important here, because of course Thorgils is pushing them all to, we have to fight.
Well,
we have
and
to,
his mother
the last
too.
man. Yeah, and the mother. Yep. So maybe we can see where Thorgils gets his mean streak. But I love his response, which is where you get this. He looks devastated. He looks like he's a beaten man. But actually, this is his moment when he becomes a warrior, a man, and who recognizes it is not Thorgils, of course, but the old master says, "Okay, this is the moment when you become a man, and not all this death has gone to waste." He says, "In exchange for the farm, your son," he's talking to his absent son himself, "your son has become a man," is what the old master Sverkel says in that moment.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful that he, that Sverkel has known from the beginning what path they were on, and he's been able to see the signs. He even tried to give Snake a way out, even saying, "You can have what I own, just leave." But then whenever he sees his grandson, who is a fool, he sees him becoming a true man, and he stands by him. Where Thorgil, which I did say Thorgil, if his brother surrendered, he would have killed him. So I guess I was wrong, because here's proof that he doesn't.
But he walks away in disgust.
He does. Yeah. He does. He walks away in disgust, and that his mother is also disgusted by it. But Sverkel, he's known the whole time what a true man looked like, and we got to see Olmar become that. Yeah,
I really like that moment. That's really wonderful. And then the next big, I think, development is when Thorfinn decides to try to intervene. It's not enough to run away. It's not enough to seek his own place. He needs to help other people in the process. So he goes back. And there's that whole confrontation where the one soldier, Drott, basically punches him 100 times or more in this contest. Okay, so Thorfinn becomes willing to undergo this suffering in order to help other people.
Right. And I love the panel right before he starts getting beaten down, when he agrees to this agreement, to this arrangement. This panel of him looking up, and he looks so childlike. The angle of the metaphorical camera, even look at his hands. His hands are hidden in his sleeves like a child. The vulnerability that he paints here right before he starts taking hit after hit after hit.
Yep. And of course, that's from Drott's Draught's perspective, who is the embodiment, much like Thorgil or Thorkel, of a great warrior who's probably killed a lot of people, and he's got a patch over one eye, and he's a big, strong fella. But then later, of course, as it's developing, you have this panel where it's again kind of from Draught's perspective, but you have Thorfinn looking much more, instead of vulnerable, determined, even though all he's doing is just taking punch after punch after punch. But this is the moment when he's using all of that determination within him to bring about a better world.
Yeah. Yes. And then Canute does end up seeing him.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I really didn't have any expectations of this. This arc, kind of the ending of this arc, really threw me for a loop. But I didn't expect Canute to see in Thorfinn the same goal, the same ambition, the same end goal, and to say, I respect that. You do it your way, I'll do it my way. The point is that it gets done, which I think shows that we finally got that really big distinction. We got a couple small distinctions, like don't let them pillage, don't let them steal, don't let them sell people into slavery, have war, but my men won't participate in these. Right, we got these small things. But this was where we saw a very big distinction between him and his father, which is that it's not about power. It's not about glory. It's not about making a name for yourself. It truly is about creating a Vinland, creating a place of peace.
It's really cool. And you have this moment when even the warrior Draught, who's been pummeling Thorfinn, finally, basically, out of just sheer awe, is like, wow, okay, forgive me for doubting you.
Yeah.
You're a true warrior. And that's the phrase he uses, and that's, of course, no accident. That's going all the way back to Thor's again. You are a true warrior. And then this thing we've been building up to all along with this. They've been distant from each other, but they've been juxtaposed all along as Thorfinn and Canute, and then finally we get them together here, facing each other. And it's really quite a moment. Here's a really great representation of it here on this page, where you have Canute, and then you have Thorfinn here. And it's just, what a moment, and what different people these two surrogate sons of Askeladd have become. Yeah. And they even bring up Askeladd during the course of this dialogue. Yeah,
it's really phenomenal. Even jumping backwards a little bit, because we skipped over this line, but I love it. As he's on this quest to embody Thor's and to figure out where he stands in the realm of making a difference without violence. And he faces Wolf, I suppose it is, and he says, we just met today. You are not my enemies. I have no enemies. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yep. And so he has embodied that ideal. He's grown up. He's become a man, as Leif observes earlier.
Yeah.
He does. Really powerful stuff.
How did you feel? I got a comment on my review video for this arc of someone saying that they love the story, but what they really don't like, what keeps taking away from it, is that they feel that there are a lot of instances where characters just make a 180 change without, and it's just because the story needs them to move forward. And the example given was Thorfinn, who was going out, he was leaving, he was taking Arnheid, he was taking Einar, he was going, and then all of a sudden, because plot needed him to confront Canute, he said, you know what, I forgot something. And then he just moves in the other direction, which I think is a fair observation. I do think that there are small hints, kind of like the Canute thing. There are small representations of his internal turmoil, but the change was still so abrupt, and I would have liked more external turmoil earlier. I get it now, but at that time I would have. And for this commenter, it was with Thorfinn. There are those small moments, like with Arnheid, the conversation with her, the realization that creating a place isn't enough. He needs to be working on where he is right now. There are those small moments, but it's sometimes the massive 180s feel like they needed more to build up to it. How do you feel about that? Is that something you felt at all?
With that particular example, no. I feel like there was plenty of build up to that, plenty of hints that was something consistent with what Thorfinn has been struggling toward all along. The idea of not just running away and building a place where he can be safe, but of making the world better. And this is a manifestation of that. Where I thought maybe you were going when you started was with Knut's change of mind.
Sure.
So that seems a little more abrupt. But you get this whole story here where he confronts the waves, which is this is funny. I love how Yukimura has incorporated this in here, because that's probably the most famous story about Knut.
Oh, really?
At one time he disembarked from a ship. This is totally apocryphal. This probably did not actually happen, but it's a story that was very popular about Knut, and it was that he got out of his ship once, and he's the king of England, Denmark, Norway, and part of Sweden, and so he's this powerful guy, and he decides to try his might on the world and says, okay, waves, stop. And the waves just keep going. And it's a moment of realizing that even a powerful king is just another person and is subject to the laws of this world, to nature. But Yukimura incorporates that famous story into Vinland Saga.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, this is really clever what he's done here.
That's a really cool nugget that I never would have known about.
Yeah, it's a famous story about Knut. He puts it in a slightly different context here, but it makes sense the way he's done that. But it's part of the explanation for why Knut's vision, it just has to be tweaked a bit to be more consistent with Thorfinn's vision. Which is, Knut has seen himself, and that happened earlier, even in the first arc, where he sees suddenly himself in opposition to God, to the suffering that seems intrinsic to this world. And so one way to combat that is to make yourself mighty, to make yourself strong so that other people can't hurt you. And that's the way he's gone about this. But he's seen in Thorfinn a different way of rebelling against the suffering in the world. Right,
which is his ultimate
something
goal.
that he... Exactly, yeah. So he realizes, okay, we have the same goal. We've been going about it differently. But this is an interesting perspective now. I'm going to have to think about this. And so he leaves. And he leaves. So that might seem abrupt to some people, I think. But it's nevertheless, to me, an important moment. So.
It worked for me and Knut because I think, well, we kind of already discussed it, is that Knut, this is the moment where it kind of shows us that he's not just falling into the path of his father. He's making choices that are pulling apart his previous morals and ideals and humanity and choices, but his goal is still about what he wants to create, not about his own glory. And when he sees someone else trying to create it, he says, okay, make it in your way. I'll make it in my way. The point is that the earth is changing and getting better, which is, it's a great layer to his character. Another really great thing that happened before Knut left was when Thorfinn said, Knut, if you won't do this, if you will fight, then I will. And then all the spears pointed to him, and he says, I'll run, which shocked everybody. But this line, what else can I do? Should you and I attempt to kill each other here? Your power saves many people and torments a few. That is what it does. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I have no right to criticize your authority. All I can do is run to a place where your power cannot reach. And this choice of, I will not fight war with war. I will not fight violence with violence. And then Knut laughs. He thinks it's hilarious.
Have we seen this look on this guy's face previous to now? No.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
it's all new.
Terrified as a kid, and here, I mean, he's been determined and jaded and all that, but here he's got genuine mirth, and I think it's because he realizes that there is another way here, and maybe even more liberating, because he's felt a prisoner of his choices. Of the crown and everything else. And to realize, this guy has a way of bringing about a better world that doesn't involve being enslaved to all of this. And I think he's liberated there. And that's why the laughter comes out.
I agree. And speaking of faces that we haven't seen from him before, I love this one too, just a couple pages later.
Yes.
Yeah, that little, that squinty,
Yeah.
like, come on, man, you gotta see the humor in this. And Thorfinn's just staring at him with his all beat up. Yeah.
But he's laughing, but what Canute is thinking inside is, he is a beautiful man.
Yeah.
To think that such a man could be born from Viking kind. Mm-hmm. So he's really touched. He's very moved by what he's seeing here. And he sees a certain beauty in Thorfinn. Even though Thorfinn has been going about this a very different way from himself, he recognizes the beauty of it. And that is enough for him to change his mind. And we see him contemplating this. And then the consequence later on is, as is reported, he decides he doesn't need to do what he wanted to do, which was to confiscate land from people in Denmark in order to fund his standing army in England. He cuts back on the army in England. And what happens? The English stay loyal to him. They realize, oh, he trusts us. And so the decision to place his trust in people rather than to overpower them, to dominate them, results in a better world. And, historically, Canute was a very, very effective king who brought about a period of stability in England and Denmark. And so I think that's a very cool way that Yukimura does this.
Yeah, I agree. And I also loved the way he showed us that Canute's choice was to leave, was to have Thorgil come ready for more fight, more battle. I don't care what my brother chooses. I'm entering the battle again. And it's empty.
Yes.
It's gone.
Gone. Everybody's gone.
Everybody's gone. And then we cut to Canute acknowledging that he and Thorfinn's end goal is the same, though their paths are different.
Yep.
And he just smiles and says, it feels good. And I thought that was such a beautiful end for that chapter. Yeah.
He looks alive.
He does.
He looks alive. The look at the expressions on his face are a person who's no longer haunted.
And it's in the eyes again. It's in the eyes again. He's softened and he's happier. It's beautiful.
And there's no head to be found.
No head to be found.
In this panel, right? No swaying.
Oh,
right?
yes. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Yeah. So, and then of course we do have poor Thorfinn, who's taken this awful beating and has a very swollen face as a result. But there's this wonderful moment there with the hand clasp between him and
with
Omar. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, it is. It is. I love seeing him go to Thorfinn, someone who he was tasked to kill, and I don't think he would have done it, but was trying to, was wanting to. And then he goes to him and says, I realize now that his task was to kill Thorfinn to become a man, and now he goes to Thorfinn to say, I've learned what it is to be a true man, and that's what you are.
And
it's
I want
beautiful.
to be like you. I want to be like you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. What an awesome full circle for this character.
Yes, beautifully said. It is a very much a full circle moment there. So we just learn so much in here. And also Snake has his moment when he tells them his name.
Yeah.
Taking away a little bit of the mystery of this guy who, my guess is because of the very more like Eastern appearance, he had the curved sword and his armor was a bit different. My guess is that maybe this guy, because the Vikings did go all over the world, all over the place, and some of them served as guards for the emperor, the Byzantine emperor. So he could have gone as far as, say, Constantinople and been one of the Varangian Guard, they were known as. They basically were employed, these Vikings were employed as bodyguards for the emperor. So maybe he served somewhere over there. He's traveled, he has a history before he came to this farm in Denmark.
Absolutely. And I love whenever he tells them his true name and they just happily shout back, thanks man, thank you. And then we cut to the scene of them sailing off with Arnheid's grave right there in the foreground. It's beautiful.
Yep. We go back to that. And then it reports basically what everybody's done afterwards. We learn about, and there's the promise of returning back. Thorfinn is going to go back to Iceland.
Oh, so your volume ends there. Wait, does your volume end there?
It continues. It continues for a bit. We do get some scenes in
Iceland.
Iceland.
So you do get to see him go home.
Yeah, we do see that. Before that, though, we do get this wonderful, another epigraph, the epigraph to chapter 100, which is another. So we started this arc with an epigraph, which was an excerpt, a stanza from the Havamal, and that was stanza 50, which was, if you recall, about being alone, being exiled, being destitute, and all of that. It was comparing him to a fir tree it was not protected. It was alone and desolate, essentially. And here we end with a different stanza from the Havamal, which is by the same translation he's using. And it says, "Young was I once, and wandered alone, and naught of the road I knew. Rich did I feel when a comrade I found, for man is man's delight." In other words, he's found friendship here. He has found friendship in this arc, which has changed. It's about Thorkill ostensibly, but it's about that bigger theme. And I thought maybe, if you don't mind, I could read that in the Old Norse.
Yes, please do.
If you'll indulge me again.
Yes, I would love that.
Okay, cool. So it's stanza 47 from the... and again, I'm using the Old Norse or Old Icelandic pronunciation, not modern. So even, there are differences, such as in the Old Norse, it's the Havamal, whereas modern Icelanders, I think, would pronounce it a little bit more like Havamal. So you hear a little bit of difference there, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody from Iceland who hears my modern Icelandic, I apologize. But they could probably confirm that there's that difference. So I'm using the Old Norse pronunciation, and I'll just read it. This is what it would have sounded like perhaps in the time of Thorfinn himself. Ungur var ek forðum, for ek ein saman. Þá varð ek vilur vega. Áðugur þottung, ek annan fan. Maður mans gaman. Which is essentially what the translation said, but it's something like, young was I once, I fared alone. It literally means one together. I fared alone. Ein saman. Then I became lost on the way. And then the contrast is, rich I thought myself when I met or when I found another. Man is man's joy. And man being the all of humankind, essentially.
Yeah.
So friendship, companionship, in contrast to the alienation and isolation that he had before.
So beautiful. I love how much he pulled from history and pulled from that and then wrote a story that complements it so well.
Yeah. No, it's really well done. And I've always said, we've been chatting, it's story first. It's always story first when you're doing fiction. But he so effectively has pulled from the source material to give us a modern, wonderful, compelling story. Yeah.
I agree. It's those little touches just add so much. I think a lot, it adds how much he honors that and how much he truly appreciates the history, and he's not just creating his own story, but he's honoring it along the way. Yeah,
so
we did get to see Thorfinn return to his family.
Thorfinn's return, and one of your favorite characters, Ylva, right?
Ylva, we got to see her again. How'd you like her this time?
Well, I mean, all of that hard work has made her into quite a strong woman, I would say, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love seeing her here. I love seeing how much we saw the beginnings of her, and now what she's turned into, what she's shaped up to be is it makes sense to me. And she's lovely. I loved the scene especially of his mom, who embraced him and welcomed him home, and then turned to Einar and said, "A brother of my son is a son of mine." I thought that was so beautiful. I'm
getting a little choked up here. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
It was a beautiful moment. It really was.
It is a beautiful moment. It is a beautiful... we're both parents, so we feel it. It's lovely to see her embrace him back and embrace the family that he's gained along the way, and said, "Great, all my family's grown. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so special. There's something very special about a mother's love.
Yeah.
It's so powerful and so vulnerable at the same time, and so beautiful. So that is a wonderful scene, and the embracing of Einar there is just very special.
It really is. Yeah. It really is. And it also does a great job of bringing a full circle to the Gardar story of how Gardar, because of his choices, he lost his family, they lost his protection, and they suffered and changed because of it. And in the end, his family was fractured and broken, and, they didn't survive. And Thorfinn, who turned his direction and didn't go down the path Gardar got, he got a redemption story for his family. He got reunited with them, and that family contact was restored. And it was such a nice cap to that parallel that we got to watch happen.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. So it's a beautiful end to this arc for sure, with a lot of promise of what's to come, I suppose, for the third arc, right?
Yes, the third arc. I'm excited to discuss that one with you too.
Well, thank you so much, Murphy, and thank you for this wonderful conversation. And thank you, I know I've said it before, but thank you also for getting me onto this really beautiful story.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for discussing it with me. I've been doing arc reviews, and I've been talking about it on my Discord, but getting to have these really lengthy discussions for each book is really fulfilling for me too, because we just get we just get to really dig in, which is what I love. So it's been a lot of fun.
Good. There's nothing more fun than digging in and geeking out.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah. So, right, we're still doing the video. Let me do that. Thank you all for joining us. Make sure I'll have Philip's channel linked in the description as always. The beginning of the next arc will be on Philip's channel. So make sure to subscribe, turn on notification bells for him so that you don't miss that. And then we'll just continue the back and forth discussions until we're caught up, which is coming too soon.
Oh my goodness, yay. But it's going to be a lot of fun getting there.
Yes, it will. All right, well, thank you again for having us. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we will see you again soon. Bye.